Hello people of the internet, welcome to episode 29 of Paint to Life. On tonight's episode, I'm going to be talking about one of these land mollusks, a terrifying creature known as a roper. What they are, what they're capable of, and how to handle them as a dungeon master as well as a player in your Dungeons & Dragons game. Also, while I paint this to life, in true D&D fashion, I'll tell you my own original story about the Redwalds, a family trying to make it through a wintry pass in the Snowflake Mountains. When a freak storm comes upon them and they take shelter in a cave, they have no idea the terror that awaits for them there. Continuing with this month's Halloween theme, I should warn you, this episode is particularly dark and intense, so viewer discretion is advised. I am GMA Tank. Let's get painting. If you missed last week's episode, the beginning of our Halloween-themed episodes, you can check it out there. And you should, because it's what's good. So what exactly is a roper? Let me start by explaining the difference between a stalactite and a stalagmite. They sound very similar, and you've seen them in all kinds of fiction and lore. They grow in caves. Some of them are on the ceiling pointing down, and some of them are on the floor going up. So what's the difference between these two things? Well, here's an easy way to remember. A stalactite holds tightly to the ceiling, whereas a stalagmite might grow big enough to touch the ceiling. So hopefully that keeps that clear for you. So what exactly is a roper? Well, I'm glad you asked. Twice now even. Jesus. Ropers start out as black eggs, laid in caves by their own kind. From those eggs hatch these little teeny slugs known as piercers. And how they work is they're very defenseless, but they climb up the walls and they start to eat the minerals, and they develop a hard, rocky shell around their triangular shaped bodies. And that's it. They sit and hang out until they're pretty stupid, but when they sense some movement, either heat or movement underneath, they just release from the ceiling and fall into their target. And if they hit one, dinger's on. A piercer evolves into its roper form. Now, ropers are bigger. They can also move on the ceilings and walls, but they have 6 sticky tentacles they can extrude from their bodies, and they use them to capture and reel prey in and deposit it into their mouths. These tendrils have these teeny black hairs on them which sink into the creature's skin and sap its strength, making it difficult to break free of its impending doom. Now they can move. They have thousands of little cilia on their pad, which lets them scrape around on the rocks, but for the most part they sit there almost like a mimic, indistinguishable from any other stalagmites or stalactites in the cave, until something gets close, and that's when gotcha. The ropers can digest almost anything except for platinum, gemstones, and magic items. So you DMs out there, you want to use a roper, they're awesome encounters. I would start them out slow, maybe only have 1 or 2 tentacles at a time, as they can be severed, but they can reattach. And if the players are outsmarting it or think they have the upper hand, throw a couple more tentacles out to spicing things up. Now, if you're a player and run into a roper and survive, make sure you remember my aforementioned comment and rip open their gizzard once they're dead to find any undigestible loot that they might have in there waiting for you. And also, their stomach acid is highly valued by alchemists, so scoop some of that up in the glass jar that I'm sure you have in your backpack. But what about our story? What about our roper? In the country of Tithir, far to the east, is a mountain range known as the Snowflake Mountains. And cutting through their snow-capped peaks is a passage that links the town of Caradun on the east and the mining village of Edgeway on the west. The Redwald family set out on the 7th of Nightall with their 2 horses and covered wagon. Nightall is the Faerunian month of December, just FYI. The Redwalds consisted of the 48-year-old patriarch Roldan, his 31-year-old wife Ramona, and their 2 daughters Astra and Mara, 12 and 8 respectively. They were attempting to complete the journey through the pass before the hard weathers of winter came. This journey should only take 3 days, but on the very first day, snow started to fall. Lightly at first, but bigger and bigger flakes. The girls were having a great time running around the wagon, catching snowflakes on their tongue. But by lunchtime, the temperature had dropped significantly, and the snow was falling a little bit more intently. Realizing the storm was intensifying, Ramona begged her husband to turn around. But he'd made this journey many times. It was far too early in the season for any serious weather to pose any threat, so he declined her ask. After their first night camping, they woke up to a foot of snow on their tents, and so much blowing snow they could barely see their cart from the site. So they packed up quickly, and Ramona and the girls got into the back of the cart, nestled up with some furs to stay warm. The temperature was now many degrees below freezing, and Roldan was starting to regret his decision, although he would never admit that aloud. The snow and wind was so intense they were like miniature daggers of ice, cutting through even the thickest wool. Roldan decided to ride through the night, as it wouldn't be wise to stop again for camp. After 4 more hours of travel, he knew that any time now they should be exiting the pass into the foothills of Tethir. If his instincts were correct, the small mining town of Edgeway should be close. That is, provided he didn't get turned around on the mountain pass in the blizzard. It was right about this time he spotted the dark depression in the rock face ahead. It was a cave. His decision was decisive and quick. Leave the cart, take some supplies, and head into the cave to wait out the worst of the storm. Roldan leaned up against a large stalagmite even taller than he was, rummaged through his pack, found and lit a torch. It cast eerie shadows of the features of the cave along the walls, and with that he drew his longsword for protection from any potential inhabitants and led his family deeper into the cave. The cave descended like a corkscrew deep into the side of the mountain, and the distance and rock all but silenced the howling winds outside, until there was a nothing sound except for the sound of the family's breathing and their footsteps. Now they ended up in a chamber that had no other paths, none that they could fit into anyways. Roldan, his waxy fingers ached as he dug through his pack for materials to light a fire. He didn't mind, he was just happy he didn't find a hibernating bear at the end of this trek. Once the fire was lit, even though it was small, the cave quickly got comfortable and the family, well, they fell asleep. That night, Astra woke up to the sound of stone sliding on stone. She sat up quickly, and in the darkness, the glowing embers emitted so little light she could barely see her own nose. The sound ceased. After their first night in the cave, Roldan realized they were going to need more supplies in order to wait out the storm. He bid them to stay put while he made multiple trips to and from the carriage, each time bringing firewood, snow that they could melt for water, and on his final trip he grabbed his longsword. His plan was to cut one of the limbs off of the dead horses to bring it down so that they could cook it for a source of food. A half hour passed, and Roldan had not returned from the surface. His wife Ramona told the girls to stay put, and she went up to check on her husband. She came back down with a look of grave concern. As the hours passed, Ramona was growing more and more distraught. Trying to put on a brave face for her girls was futile, as her tears betrayed her true feelings. Despite their despair, they fell asleep. Astra woke again that night to the sound of stone sliding on stone. This time, she laid still for 10 minutes just listening to the sound. It was definitely not natural, and it sounded like it was coming from up the passage. When her mother woke, she realized they were out of food, and she had deduced that something terrible must have befallen her husband. She bade the girls to stay put, and that she was going to go out and find them help. Astra comforted her little sister, who was crying at the thought of her mother leaving them.
Mara, I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you.
Ramona ascended to the top of the cave with the girls. The tall stalagmite was at the mouth there to greet them. Behind it, the storm still raged. With one final embrace, the girls watched their mother disappear into the white and then headed back down into the cave. 2 more days passed, and the girls were now starving. Astra was convinced something was watching them in the cave, but despite her intensive search, she found nothing.
Mara, we have to go. I'm sure Mom and Dad found help, but we can't wait for them anymore. Okay, I'm scared, Astra. I love you, Mara. Nothing bad can happen as long as we're together.
Bundled in their furs, dry and warm, the girls ascended to the top of the cave. When they got near the surface, they realized the storm wasn't as loud as it had been. They smiled at each other.
I told you! It's gonna be alright.
When they rounded that last corner, however, their smiles dropped, as right in front of them, in the center of the floor, rose that stalagmite, taller than their father. Neither girl remembered having to go around the structure before, as it was quite an impediment to them now.
It's okay. Let's just get out of here.
The girls slipped past the monolith, and right ahead of them was a bright blue sky with a ray of sunlight shining into the cave. Suddenly Astra felt a strange sensation, something grabbing her foot. She looked down and saw a stone-colored tentacle pulsing, wrapped around her ankle, tightening. Looking over at her sister, she too had one of these tentacles wrapped around her waist, and now both girls were being pulled backwards, back into the cave, and towards this massive stone stalagmite. A large red eye the size of a basketball suddenly opened in the center of the stone pillar, and from below it jutted a massive, toothy, slime-filled maw with stone teeth and a dark gullet. Terrified, Both girls screamed frantically and struggled as they were being reeled in closer to this beast. Each was effortlessly lifted off the ground and moved even closer to this massive mouth. Suddenly Astra spotted her father's longsword. She picked it up and savagely swung at the tentacle, grabbing her leg, severing it, thus dropping her to the ground. The large creature's eye winced ever so slightly. Astra then ran towards Mara, slashed the tentacle that had been lowering her right into its mouth, thus dropping her sister to the ground.
Run, Mara!
Astra yelled as she took defensive swings against the large living stalagmite. From its stony flanks, 4 more tentacles appeared and grabbed Astra in 3 different places along her body. Mara now turned around and watched through tears and horror as her sister was lowered into the mouth of this beast and eaten. Her screams turning to silence as pieces of her sunk into the bowels of the roper. The tentacles then darted at the 8-year-old girl, but made a strained stop about 10 feet from her, as that they were at their maximum range, and she was just at the mouth of the cave. Then there was the sound of stone sliding along stone, as the roper slid ever so slowly across the floor, the tentacles in turn moving slowly towards the young girl.
Roar!
Mara defiantly roared in anguish at the eye and mouth that were slowly advancing towards her as she turned and left the cave. The storm was gone. There was deep snow covering everything out here, including, unbeknownst to her, her mother's frozen corpse not 200 feet from the entrance of the cave. However, the most shocking thing was that there, in the distance, down the foothills, maybe a kilometer away, was the mining town of Edgeway. She could see the rising plumes of smoke from the fireplaces in the distance, through tears that streamed down her face, as she took the first steps towards her salvation, leaving the continual guttural roar of the creature behind her. Mind you, from overhead, atop the ceiling of the entrance of the cave, perfectly disguised as a stalactite, a piercer had been watching, patiently waiting for 3 weeks for something, anything, to walk underneath it. Mara was that unlucky something. It was once her foot touched the snow that she felt it. The sensation of being struck by something so much heavier in mass than yourself that you're crumpled into the ground like a crushed beer can. There was no pain. The shock was too intense. She just let out a soft cry before death took her. Thus passes the Redwald family into the realm of Kelemvor, god of the dead, at the many hands of the Roper. Here's the finished miniature of the Roper. I whipped this together using magnets so that you could reattach and reposition the limbs, articulate them as you'd like, or to simulate combat damage with your PCs. So this is the week of the giveaway for the gold wormling. So now the names are on the screen, and I'm going to roll this golden die 20 to see the winner. And that winner will be 11. Mike DePaul, whose favorite episode was Ariadne the Spider. Congratulations, Mike. I'll be reaching out to you to get your information, and I will send you this prize. Thank you for everyone who's supported Paint to Life thus far. As you can see, I'm trying a new format with the channel. I'm looking forward to developing it further. So like and subscribe if you guys like my storytelling, and share with your friends. Make sure you support your friendly local gaming stores. Head out there, get some paints, miniatures, and get into this hobby with us. And as always, we'll see you next week for another Halloween themed episode. Wash your hands, people. Just wanted to say one more time, special thanks to my friends and family for supporting me during this Paint to Life journey. Episode 30 next week. Here's to 30 episodes after that. Thanks, guys.